Behind the gilded doors of London's most perfect hotel, a century-old evil festers. When Miss Marple checks into Bertram's, she doesn't just find tea and tranquility. She finds a stage for vanishing diplomats, coded messages in hollow books, and staff who move like ghosts. Who is the mastermind pulling strings from the shadows? What lies in the flooded vault beneath the chapel? And can one elderly woman unravel a conspiracy woven into the hotel's very foundations before the silence of Bertram's becomes her own? Chapter 1. A perfect facade. The handsome cab, a relic itself, drew up before the imposing facade of Bertram's hotel with a clatter of hooves and a jingle of harness that seemed oddly muted against the hushed reverence of Pont Street. Jane Marple, wrapped in her sensible tweed coat and clutching a worn carpet bag, stepped out onto the pristine pavement. She blinked, adjusting her spectacles, and looked up. Bertram's wasn't merely a hotel. It was a sanctuary frozen in time. Its warm red brick exterior, adorned with gleaming white stonework and delicate wrought iron balconies, spoke of an era where gas lamps still flickered and gentlemen tipped their hats. The polished brass plaque bearing the name Bertram's seemed to glow with an inner light, promising comfort, discretion, and an unwavering adherence to standards long abandoned elsewhere. It was, Miss Marple thought, with a familiar flutter of pleasure, exactly as she remembered it, from a brief visit decades ago, a bastion of Edwardian bedroom door. "Will there be anything else, Miss Marple?" he inquired, his hands clasped behind his back. "No, thank you, Henry. This is quite perfect," Miss Marple assured him, placing her handbag on the dressing table. He bowed slightly. "Dinner is served from 7:30. Should you require anything, merely lift the telephone receiver. Your maid, Elsie, will attend to your needs." With another silent bow, he withdrew, closing the door with the softest of clicks. Miss Marple stood still for a moment, absorbing the silence. It was profound, almost unnerving. She unpacked her few belongings, her nightgown, her toiletries, her knitting bag, placing them in the drawers and wardrobe with methodical care. As she hung her best dress, a sensible navy blue, she noticed something. On the polished surface of the dressing table, beside the silver-backed hairbrush and comb set, lay a small, oval-shaped brooch. It wasn't hers. It was a delicate thing, a single pearl surrounded by tiny seed pear, and towels folded with military precision. A chambermaid was inside, her back to the door, stacking fresh pillowcases. Miss Marple recognized her uniform. It was Elsie, her assigned maid. Elsie moved with the same silent efficiency as Henry and the waitress. As Miss Marple watched, Elsie finished stacking, closed the cupboard door with a soft click, and turned. Her face, when she saw Miss Marple, remained placid, but Miss Marple thought she detected a flicker of something else in her eyes. Not fear, exactly, but a watchfulness, a guardedness that seemed at odds with the hotel's facade of serene hospitality. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," Elsie said, her voice soft and respectful. "Is your room quite to your satisfaction?" "Oh yes, perfectly, Elsie, thank you," Miss Marple replied warmly. "I found a small brooch on the dressing table. Perhaps it belongs to a previous guest?" She held out the pearl brooch. Elsie took it, her fingers brushing Miss Marple's. Her skin was cool. She mentioned it. "Thank you for your honesty, Miss Marple. Such items are catalogued and stored securely. We have a remarkably low rate of permanent loss here at Bertram's." "I'm sure you do," Miss Marple said softly. "The service is quite exceptional. Everyone's so attentive. We pride ourselves on it, Miss Marple. Bertram's standards are non-negotiable." The clerk's tone was final, polite, but dismissive. Miss Marple nodded and moved away, her mind whirring. The Henderson incident, the brooch, the waitress and the handbag, Elsie's watchfulness, the unnerving perfection of it all. Small things, trivial things. Yet, they formed a pattern, like faint scratches on a polished surface. Scratches that shouldn't be there. She returned to her suite. The The room was exactly as she'd left it. The brooch was gone. She sat by the window, overlooking the quiet street. The light was fading, lamps beginning to glow along Pont Street. She took out her knitting again, the gray wool soft in her hands. The click of the needles was a small, comforting sound in the perfect silence. She thought of St. Mary Mead, of the village gossip, the small human dramas, the occasional petty theft or squabble. Life there was messy, unpredictable, human. Bertram's hotel was the antithesis. It was flawless, silent, efficient. A machine running with clockwork precision. But machines, Miss Marple knew from experience, could be used for purposes other than their intended design. And perfection, especially when it was so absolute, so relentlessly maintained, often hid something rotten at its core. The missing pen, the forgotten brooch, the brush against the handbag, these weren't just random accidents in a well-run establishment. They felt like tests, probes, small silent intrusions into the guest's privacy, carried out with such skill they were almost invisible. Who benefited? Who was behind this quiet, systematic pilfering? And why? The items themselves were valuable, yes, but the method was the truly disturbing part. It required coordination, discipline, an almost inhuman level of control over the staff. It wasn't the work of one opportunistic thief. It felt like an operation. Miss Marple finished a row of knitting. She looked around the perfect room, at the polished furniture, the pristine bed linen, the silent telephone. The facade was beautiful, comforting even. But the scratches she'd glimpsed beneath it were worrying. They hinted at a darkness, a cold calculation that chilled her more than any overt threat. She folded her knitting carefully and placed it back in her bag. She walked to the door and opened it. Henry materialized instantly, as if he'd been waiting just outside. "Henry," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm. "I find myself unexpectedly charmed by Bertram's and the tranquility of Pont Street. I believe I shall extend my stay. Indefinitely, for the time being. Would you be so kind as to inform the clerk?" Henry's placid expression didn't flicker. "Of course, Miss Marple. An excellent choice. We are delighted you wish to prolong your visit. I shall attend to it immediately." He gave a slight bow. "Thank you, Henry." Miss Marple closed the door softly. She leaned back against it for a moment, listening to the silence. It was no longer comforting. It was the silence of a watchful predator, the silence before a carefully planned move. The perfect facade of Bertram's hotel concealed something sinister, and Jane Marple, with her knitting needles and her deceptively frail appearance, had just decided to stay and watch. The game, she suspected, was already afoot. She would need to be very, very quiet and very, very observant. The hunt for the truth behind the perfection had begun. Chapter 2: The Vanishing Visitor. The following dawn crept over Pont Street like a diffident specter, painting the sky in shades of pearl and pale rose. Inside Bertram's hotel, however, time seemed suspended in its own carefully curated bubble. The silence in the corridors was absolute, broken only by the distant, rhythmic swish-swish of a carpet sweeper on the floor below, a sound as regular and impersonal as a metronome. Miss Marple, an early riser by habit and necessity, had already partaken of a tray of tea and toast delivered by the silent Elsie. Now, seated in the armchair by her window, she watched the street come to life below. Delivery vans, early commuters, the occasional dog walker, a world of mundane bustle that felt strangely disconnected from the hushed perfection of the hotel. Her mind was not on the street, however. It was replaying the small anomalies of the previous day. The cool efficiency of Elsie taking the brooch, Henderson's flustered departure, the waitress's D. Again, it was the concierge, Mr. Humphreys. Miss Marple recognized him from her arrival yesterday, a man of medium height, immaculate in his morning coat, with a face like a well-carved mask of polite efficiency. His eyes, however, held a sharp, watchful intelligence that belied his bland expression. "Sir Alistair," Mr. Humphreys murmured, his voice low and smooth, barely disturbing the room's quiet. "A pleasure to see you utilizing our library. Is there anything specific you require? A particular volume?" Sir Alistair Finch, for Miss Marple had now placed the name. She'd seen his photograph in newspapers discussing some recent diplomatic wrangling, turned. "Humphreys. No, nothing specific at present, merely acclimatizing." His voice was cultured, clipped, carrying an undertone of tension that the library's silence amplified. "Of course, Sir Alistair. The library is entirely at your disposal. Should you require refreshment or perhaps the use of the telephone?" Mr. Humphreys gestured to the room, though he seemed to avoid looking directly at anyone for long. He finished quickly, declined coffee, and rose. As he did, his napkin slipped from his lap and fluttered to the floor. Before he could bend, or the waiter could move, Mr. Humphreys materialized beside his chair, as if summoned by the falling linen. "Allow me, Sir Alistair," Humphreys said smoothly, retrieving the napkin with a flourish. Sir Alistair gave him a curt nod. "Thank you, Humphreys." He turned and left the dining room without another word. Mr. Humphreys folded the napkin meticulously and placed it back on the table. As he did, Miss Marple saw his eyes flick towards the seat Sir Alistair had vacated. He leaned down slightly, as if to adjust the chair, and Miss Marple could have sworn his fingers brushed the carpet beneath it for the briefest instant. Then, straightening, he gave a minute signal to the waiter before following Sir Alistair out of the room. A deliberate drop? A signal? Miss Marple's mind raced. Message? She turned back to Sir Alistair Finch's entry. There, in the same faint pencil, almost erased, but still discernible if you knew what to look for. Pry. A.T. 3 letters. Fragments. The fragments of what? And who was leaving them? The clerk? Humphreys? Someone else with access to this book? Footsteps sounded in the corridor, approaching the office door. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Miss Marple. She snapped her notebook shut, slipped it back into her bag, and quickly smoothed the page of the registry. She moved away from the desk just as the door opened. It was Mr. Humphreys. He stopped short, surprise flickering across his usually impassive face for a nanosecond before being replaced by polished concern. "Miss Marple, I do hope you haven't been detained. Is there something I can assist you with? This office is generally for staff use only." "Oh, Mr. Humphreys," Miss Marple exclaimed, allowing a touch of flustered embarrassment to color her voice. "My sincerest apologies. Alistair at breakfast. I hope he isn't unwell." Humphrey's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. A flicker of something, surprise, calculation, crossed his face before being smoothed away. "Sir Alistair? No, Miss Marple. He left rather early this morning. An unexpected summons, I believe. He departed before dawn." "Before dawn?" Miss Marple echoed, her spoon pausing midway to her mouth. "How very sudden and inconvenient with the weather so dreary. I do hope his journey wasn't too arduous." "He left quite promptly, Miss Marple. Arrangements were made efficiently." Humphrey's tone was final, discouraging further inquiry. "Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" "No, thank you, Mr. Humphreys. That will be all." Miss Marple gave him a dismissive little nod and returned her attention to her kedgeree, her mind racing. Left before dawn? It felt wrong. Sir Alistair Finch hadn't struck her as a man who would slip away in the pre-dawn gloom without a word, without even set. No sign of Sir Alistair Finch's personal presence, no discarded book, no used glass, no toiletries in the bathroom. It was sterile, too sterile, like a stage set struck immediately after the final curtain. She moved quickly into the bedroom. The wardrobe doors were closed. She opened them, empty, Not a single hanger out of place. She checked the bedside tables. Nothing. She knelt down and peered under the bed. Dust bunnies, but nothing else. Where was the trunk Elsie denied existed? Or had it truly never been there? Her eyes scanned the room again, looking for anything out of place. Her gaze fell on the heavy velvet curtains framing the window. They were drawn slightly open. She walked over and pulled them back further. Rain streaked the glass, and there, tucked into the narrow space between the heavy curtain and the window frame, almost invisible against the dark velvet, was a small, folded piece of paper. Her pulse quickened. She reached in and carefully extracted it. It was a small square of expensive notepaper, the kind embossed with the Bertram's crest. Unfolding it, she saw a single line of writing in a hurried, spiky script she didn't recognize. The clock chimes twice when the sparrow flies east. She read it again. Nonsense or code? It felt like the latter, echoing the cryptic marks in the registry. A signal? A warning? Instructions? And who was it meant for? Finch or someone else? And why leave it here, hidden in the curtains? Had Finch left it before he departed? Or had someone else placed it after he was gone? The sound of footsteps approaching in the corridor jolted her back to reality. She quickly refolded the note and slipped it into her pocket. She smoothed the curtains back into place and hurried out of Suite 7, pulling the door closed softly behind her, just as Elsie turned the corner at the far end of the corridor, carrying a mop and bucket. Elsie's eyes narrowed slightly as she saw Miss Marple emerging from the suite. "Can I help you with something?" "Miss Marple," she asked, her voice cool. "Just admiring the view from the window, Elsie," Miss Marple said brightly, gesturing vaguely towards the rain-streaked glass. "Such a pity about the weather. Makes one appreciate a warm, dry hotel even more." She gave the maid a benign smile and walked briskly back towards her own suite, her mind whirling. Sir Alistair Finch was gone, vanished. According to Humphreys and Elsie, he'd checked out early, taking only 2 suitcases. But Miss Marple knew better. She'd seen the tension, the coded messages, the elaborate choreography. She'd found the cryptic note hidden in his room. And Elsie's lie about the trunk confirmed it. Finch hadn't simply departed. He'd disappeared. And Bertram's hotel, with its perfect facade and silent, watchful staff, had swallowed him whole. The question now was not just what was happening here, but who had made Sir Alistair Finch vanish, and why. The game had escalated from petty theft to something far more dangerous. Miss Marple closed the door of her own suite and leaned against it, the folded note a cold, heavy weight in her pocket. The hunt was no longer just about scratches on the surface. It was about uncovering the darkness lurking deep within Bertram's walls. And Sir Alistair Finch was the first victim she'd uncovered. She needed to understand that note. She needed to find out what the clock chimes twice when the sparrow flies east truly meant. The perfect facade was cracking. And behind it, Miss Marple sensed a chilling void. Chapter 3. Tea-Time Treachery. The rain had ceased by midday, leaving behind a London draped in damp, shimmering gray. Inside Bertram's hotel, however, the atmosphere had shifted. The profound, almost funereal silence of the previous days had been replaced by a subtle, almost subliminal hum of tension. It wasn't audible. It was felt in the slightly quicker pace of the silent footmen in the lobby, in the way Mr. Humphrey's eyes scanned the room with increased frequency, in the watchful stillness of Elsie as she passed Miss Marple in the corridor. Sir Alistair Finch's disappearance had sent a ripple through the hotel's meticulously maintained pond, disturbing the placid surface. Miss Marple, seated once more in the lounge for afternoon tea, felt the change acutely. She had spent the morning deciphering the note found in Finch's suite. The clock chimes twice when the sparrow flies east, and correlating it with the Morse fragments from the registry. ITTETAT, pieces of a puzzle, onto the saucer far more than the coffee cost. And they walked towards the exit. Mr. Humphreys materialized near the door, giving them a slight, respectful nod as they passed. They didn't acknowledge him, stepping out into the damp afternoon without a backward glance. Miss Marple's heart hammered against her ribs. They were gone. But the waitress had the note. Where would she take it? To Humphreys? To someone else? Miss Marple needed to intercept it. But how? She couldn't very well accost the waitress in the corridor. She needed a pretext, a reason to be where the note was going. Her eyes fell on the library. It was quiet, secluded, the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. And it held the partner's desk, the scene of Finch's restless vigil. It felt like a nexus. She finished her tea, leaving a few coins on her own saucer, and rose. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. She walked towards the library, her mind racing with possibilities. The library was empty, bathed in the soft. Would notice the substitution immediately. Leaving the library, Miss Marple felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with profound unease. She was now in possession of stolen intelligence. She was no longer just an observer. She was an active participant, however unwittingly. The danger felt closer, more tangible. She decided to seek out the one person who had shown a flicker of humanity, a crack in the hotel's facade of robotic efficiency. Elsie, the chambermaid. She needed to understand the scale of the fear gripping the staff. She found Elsie in the linen cupboard on the first floor, meticulously folding sheets with the same military precision as before. The sight of the young woman's rigid posture and focused intensity struck Miss Marple with unexpected force. This wasn't just a job, it was survival. Elsie, Miss Marple said softly, stepping into the cupboard doorway. Elsie jumped, her hands flying to her chest. Miss Marple! You gave me a start. Her voice was higher than usual, laced with, whispered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Still dark. I was coming up to start the early rooms. I saw them in the corridor, near Suite 7. 2 big men, wearing dark coats, hats pulled low, not uniforms. One had a scar. Here. She touched her cheek near the jawline. They had Sir Alistair between them. He wasn't struggling. He looked dazed or drugged. And they had the trunk, a big, heavy leather trunk. They went down the service stairs, the ones near the old laundry chute. Down the service stairs, Miss Marple repeated, filing the detail away. And Sir Alistair, did he say anything? Elsie shook her head. Nothing. He just looked gone, like his spirit had already left. She shuddered. And before that, the day before he vanished, I saw him. Late at night. I was taking extra towels to the West Wing. He was coming out of Mr. Humphreys' office. He looked furious and frightened. He was carrying a small portfolio case, black leather. He didn't see me. Mr. Humphreys' office. Her brother were hostages to silence. She needed to see what was in that hollow book. It was the only physical evidence she had, besides the notes. She needed to understand what Sir Alistair Finch had possessed that was worth kidnapping him for. She needed to prepare for twilight. Returning to her suite, Miss Marple locked the door and drew the heavy curtains. She sat at the small writing desk, took out the hollow book, and examined it carefully under the lamplight. It was exquisitely crafted, the leather supple, the gilt lettering on the spine flawless. She opened it again to the blank pages. Running her fingers along the inside edge of the back cover, she felt a slight irregularity, a tiny, almost invisible catch. She pressed it. There was a soft click. The back cover swung open like a small door, revealing a shallow compartment hidden within the book's thickness. Nestled inside were not papers, but 3 small, flat objects. Miss Marple carefully lifted them out. The first was a pass. Determined, the time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. She needed to get to that bell tower room before the exchange happened. She needed to see who the Nightingale was and what they were exchanging for Sir Alistair Finch's ghost. The perfect facade of Bertram's hotel was about to be shattered, and Jane Marple, armed with her knitting bag full of secrets, was going to be the one to swing the hammer. She picked up her bag, checked that her door key was secure, and stepped out into the dim, hushed corridor, heading towards the East Wing and the unknown dangers lurking in the bell tower above. The game was afoot, and the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 4. The Chambermaid's Confession. The ascent to the disused bell tower was an exercise in mounting dread. Miss Marple, guided by Elsie's whispered directions, navigated the labyrinthine service corridors of Bertram's hotel with a stealth that belied her years. The air grew cooler, damper, redolent of dust, disuse, and the faint metallic tang of old machinery. The plush carpets and gleaming woodwork of the guest floors gave way to bare stone steps, peeling paint, and the oppressive silence of forgotten spaces. Elsie had shown her the narrow, unmarked door tucked beneath the grand main staircase, leading to the staff netherworld. From there, it was a climb. First up a cramped, spiral staircase used by laundrymaids decades past, then along a dimly lit corridor lined with abandoned cleaning carts and broken furniture, and finally, to a heavy oak door, bound in iron, set into the wall at the very end of the East Wing corridor. This, Elsie had whispered, her voice trembling, led to tea. The tall man demanded, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the cavernous space. He had a distinct accent, Eastern European perhaps. "Patience, Victor," the other man hissed. His voice was higher, more anxious. He said, "Twilight, he'll come. He has the merchandise." "He'd better," Victor snarled. "The boss is not a patient man. And Finch? Where is Finch? He should have delivered the package himself." "Finch is indisposed," the nervous man replied evasively. "A complication. But I have the key. That's what matters." He patted his jacket pocket. Miss Marple's blood ran cold. The key. They meant the device. Sir Alistair Finch was the package. Or at least, the device he carried was. And these men were expecting someone else, Nightingale, to complete the exchange. They moved towards the workbench, their shapes shifting in the gloom. Victor leaned against it, arms crossed, a menacing statue. The other man, whom Miss Marple now thought of as the Weasel, paced restlessly, casting nervous, instantaneous. Victor and the Weasel flinched violently, instinctively ducking. Nightingale dropped into a defensive crouch, her hand flying to a concealed holster under her arm. The cacophony of the bell reverberated, masking other sounds. In that split second of chaos, Miss Marple acted. She burst from behind the sandbags, not towards the door, but towards the workbench. Her target wasn't the device or the case, but the oil lantern sitting on the edge of the bench, its glass chimney dusty but intact. She grabbed it, swung it with surprising force, and smashed it against the stone floor beside the workbench. Shattered glass exploded. The oil inside ignited instantly with a whoosh of flame, casting leaping, dancing shadows that distorted everything. The sudden light and heat caused the three figures to recoil, shielding their eyes. Victor roared in anger and surprise. The Weasel cried out. Nightingale swore fluently, in a language Miss Marple didn't recognize. Miss Marple didn't hesitate. Lady with a knitting bag was their enemy. Bertram's hotel was no longer just a place of observation. It was a hunting ground. Later, hidden in the sanctuary of her locked suite, Miss Marple examined her prize. The metal case was sturdy, secured by a combination lock. She had no time for finesse. Using a sturdy letter opener, she pried at the edges until, with a snap, the lock gave way. Inside, nestled in black foam, were three items: a slim, tablet-like device with a smooth package, dark screen, a small, intricate crystal, and a single sheet of paper. The paper contained a complex sequence of numbers and letters, clearly an access code. The tablet device, when she pressed a small button on its side, flickered to life, displaying a series of rotating geometric symbols before settling on a blank screen demanding a passcode. The crystal felt unnaturally cold to the touch, humming with a faint, almost imperceptible vibration. This was advanced technology, far beyond anything Miss Marple had encountered. Bertram himself. They said he wasn't just a hotelier. They said he had connections during the war, strange comings and goings, rooms that were always locked. She said the hotel had secrets buried deep in its foundations. She made me promise to always be careful, to always do exactly as I was told. No questions asked. Fresh tears welled in her eyes. I didn't understand then. I thought she was just being superstitious. But now we understand, Miss Marple finished grimly. The secrets are real, and they're still active. Bertram's hotel was built by a man with a penchant for secrecy, perhaps even criminality. That legacy has been inherited, or perhaps co-opted, by a far more dangerous organization. Humphreys is their gatekeeper. Victor and the Weasel are their enforcers. Nightingale, she's something else. An operative, maybe a freelancer, and they are all after this. She gestured towards the bed where the case was hidden. And your brother is the leverage they're using to get it. Fragments were not jewels or documents, but something unexpected. A collection of small, intricately carved wooden birds. A robin, a wren, a blackbird, and a sparrow. Each bird had a tiny, almost invisible hinge along its back. Miss Marple picked up the sparrow. It felt smooth, cool. She pressed the hinge. The bird's back opened, revealing a shallow compartment. Empty. The sparrow, Miss Marple murmured, remembering Finch's note. The clock chimes twice when the sparrow flies east. It wasn't just a code phrase. It was a literal reference to a hiding place within a hiding place. This chest, these birds, they were part of the original Bertram's secret communication system, a legacy inherited by the current criminals. She carefully placed the metal case containing the decryption device inside the sparrow's compartment and closed it. Then, she placed the sparrow bird back in the chest, closing the lid and pushing the chest back into its corner, covering it loosely with debris. It was hidden but accessible if needed. As they turned to leave, Elsie's torch beam caught something else half buried near the chest, a small, leather-bound journal. Miss Marple picked it up. The leather was cracked and fragile. She opened it. The entries were in a faded, elegant script dated during the First World War. Most were mundane hotel records, guest lists, orders, maintenance notes, but towards the back, the entries changed. They became cryptic, references to packages, couriers, dead drops in the aviary, the sparrow has flown east, and one name underlined several times, Moriarty. Not the Napoleon of crime, surely, but perhaps a namesake or a code name for the original owner's mysterious contact. Miss Marple slipped the journal into her knitting bag. It was another piece of the puzzle, a link to the hotel's sinister origins. We must go, she whispered to Elsie. They retraced their steps, sealing the false wall behind them. Emerging back into the main hotel corridor, the silence felt more oppressive than ever. They were safe for now, but the danger was palpable. Elsie's brother was still a prisoner. The criminals knew Miss Marple had the case, and they had the resources and ruthlessness of a shadowy organization. As they parted near Elsie's small staff room, the girl clutched Miss Marple's arm. They'll be watching you everywhere now, Miss Marple. Every move. I know, my dear, Miss Marple said softly, but they also underestimate me. They see an old lady. They don't see the mind behind the knitting needles. We have the journal. We know about the deep cellar and the sparrow. We know they hold your brother. We have advantages. We just need to use them wisely. Be brave, Elsie. Watch. Listen. Especially around Mr. Humphreys. And the dinner service tonight. Pay close attention to who serves whom." Elsie nodded, her eyes wide but determined. "I will, Miss Marple. For Tommy." Miss Marple returned to her suite, the weight of the journal in her bag, a counterpoint to the hidden case in the deep cellar. She sat by the window, looking out at the glittering, indifferent city. The perfect facade of Bertram's hotel was shattered for her. She'd seen the rot beneath, the violence, the espionage stretching back decades. She'd faced down armed criminals and escaped with a device capable of untold damage. She'd gained a terrified but courageous ally in Elsie, and she'd learned the hotel's original owner had secrets that echoed through time, secrets that had spawned the current nest of vipers. But the cost was high. An innocent boy was held hostage. The huntress was now the hunted. The criminals would be desperate, ruthless in their efforts to retrieve the decryption algorithms and eliminate the threat she posed. Dinner tonight would not be a meal. It would be a minefield. Every waiter, every guest, every glance could be a threat. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, the gray wool a familiar comfort in her hands. The needles clicked softly in the silent room, a small, defiant sound against the encroaching darkness. The game had escalated into a deadly chess match, and the next move was hers. She needed to be ready. She needed to watch. And above all, she needed to find a way to save Tommy, the chambermaid's brother, before the vipers struck again. The bell tower confrontation was over, but the war for Bertram's soul had just begun. Chapter 5. A Dinner to Remember. The grand dining room of Bertram's hotel, usually a sanctuary of hushed elegance and clinking silverware, felt like a pressure cooker. Crystal chandeliers blazed with unnatural brightness, casting sharp shadows that seemed to writhe on the damask walls. The air, thick with the scent of roasted beef, expensive perfume, and underlying fear, vibrated with a tension that set Miss Marple's teeth on edge. Every rustle of a napkin, every murmur of conversation, every scrape of a chair leg sounded unnaturally loud. She sat at her usual small table near the window, a fortress of apparent calm amidst the simmering dread, her knitting bag resting beside her plate like a loyal, if unconventional, companion. Elsie had managed to slip her a note before the service began, delivered with a trembling hand and eyes darting like a frightened bird's. Tommy in laundry, cold, scared. Victor watches, they search rooms. Yours next? Be careful. The words were a cold knot in Miss Liquidated. Until. The timetable has been accelerated, my lord. Pierre interrupted smoothly, his eyes darting towards Humphreys. Circumstances necessitate it. The package is ready. The location is confirmed. Midnight, the North Quay. Lord Ashworth wiped his brow with a napkin, his agitation palpable. Very well. Midnight. But I want verification, proof of possession, before the final transfer. No more delays, no more excuses. Understand? Perfectly, my lord. Pierre gave a slight bow. Enjoy your meal. He moved away, refilling Ashworth's goblet as he did so, his movements economical, precise. Miss Marple watched the exchange like a hawk. The package, North Quay, midnight. Another exchange, another piece of the deadly puzzle. And Pierre the sommelier was deeply involved, not just passing notes like the waitress, but actively facilitating a major transaction. The scale of the operation was dizzying. Lord Ashworth was clearly a major player, possibly the financier or buyer. His nerve leaning closer. He sniffed the air near Ashworth's face, then picked up the fallen goblet, sniffing the dregs. His eyes widened. Bitter almonds, cyanide. Quick, extremely quick, nasty business. Cyanide. Miss Marple's blood ran cold. Fast-acting, brutal, almost impossible to counter. Administered in the wine. But how? When? Pierre had poured it. Had he poisoned it? Or had the poison been introduced earlier? She watched Pierre. The sommelier looked utterly devastated, not like a man who'd just committed murder, but like a man who'd witnessed a catastrophe he felt responsible for. Or perhaps he was an Oscar-worthy actor. Humphrey stood up, his expression thunderous. "Everyone, please, return to your seats. The room must be secured. This is a terrible tragedy, but we must maintain order." His voice cut through the din, restoring a semblance of quiet. Guests reluctantly sat down, whispering amongst themselves, casting fearful glances at the body now covered with a tablecloth. Miss Marple, standard sommelier practice, Miss Marple had observed. The poison must have been introduced after pouring, directly into the goblet. A smear on the rim? A capsule dissolved by the wine? A quick, deft touch. She carefully wrapped the goblet in the tissue and hid it inside her knitting bag, beneath the wool. She needed to find Elsie. The girl was her eyes and ears, and Tommy's life hung in the balance. The murder of Lord Ashworth changed everything. It was a brutal escalation, a sign that the conspiracy was fracturing under pressure, or that someone was eliminating loose ends. Either way, it made Tommy's position infinitely more precarious. She found Elsie in a small linen closet off the main corridor, sobbing quietly into a stack of towels. The girl looked up, her face ravaged by fear and exhaustion. "Miss Marple, oh, Miss Marple, they killed him. Right there, in front of everyone." "I know, my dear," Miss Marple said softly, stepping inside and closing the door. "It was cyanide in the service tunnels. The ones behind the kitchen. They run past the laundry outer wall. There's a ventilation grate you can look through. I saw it yesterday when we were going to the deep cellar. Remember?" Elsie nodded, swallowing hard. I remember. The grate near the old boiler." "Exactly," Miss Marple urged. "Go there, look. See if you can see Victor or Tommy, or if the cistern room door is ajar. Be quick, be silent. I'll wait here, but hurry, Elsie, before they decide to move Tommy again, or worse." Tears streamed down Elsie's face, but she wiped them away with a grimy hand, a flicker of her old determination returning. "For Tommy," she whispered. "I'll do it for Tommy." She slipped out of the linen closet and melted into the shadows of the service corridor. Miss Marple waited, the silence in the small closet thick and oppressive. Every creak of the building, every distant footstep, sounded like an approaching threat. Said firmly, "We get to the North Quay. We find this fallback position. We rescue Tommy, and we expose this whole nest of vipers." She placed her hands on Elsie's shoulders. "Can you do this, Elsie? For Tommy. For all the other innocents trapped by this place." Elsie looked at Miss Marple, the fear still there, but now overlaid with a fierce, desperate courage. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Yes," she said, her voice low but steady. "For Tommy. I'll jam the valve." "In 20 minutes. Good girl," Miss Marple said. "Now go. Prepare. I'll meet you at the bottom of the service stairs near the loading bay in 15 minutes. Be ready." Elsie nodded once, a sharp, determined movement, and slipped away into the shadows. Miss Marple was alone again in the linen closet. The weight of the journal, the hidden goblet, the knowledge of the coming confrontation pressed down on her. She was an old lady, armed only with her wits. A chambermaid's desperate courage, and a plan built on steam and misdirection. They were facing ruthless killers, spies, and kidnappers. The odds were astronomical. But she thought of Sir Alastair Finch, vanished into the hotel's maw. She thought of Lord Ashworth, poisoned over a goblet etched with a sparrow. She thought of Tommy, the terrified boy held in a damp, dark cage. She thought of the legacy of Moriarty poisoning this hotel from its foundations. She smoothed her skirt, picked up her knitting bag containing the journal, the goblet, and the hidden key to the decryption device and stepped out of the closet. Her steps were quiet, her expression calm, but her eyes held the cold fire of resolve. The perfect facade of Bertram's hotel was stained with blood and treachery. Tonight, under the cover of manufactured steam and the looming midnight on the North Quay, Jane Marple intended to shatter it completely. The hunt was no longer covert. It was a race against time to save a life and bring down a conspiracy. The next move was hers, and it would be made not with knitting needles, but with courage, cunning, and the unwavering belief that even the darkest secrets could not endure the light of truth. She moved towards the service stairs, ready to meet Elsie and step into the heart of the storm. Chapter 6. Behind Closed Doors. The planned cacophony never materialized. Instead of the shriek of venting steam and the clang of distressed metal, the silence in the service corridor deepened, thickening into something ominous. Miss Marple, waiting in the shadows near the loading bay exit, felt the absence of sound like a physical weight. 20 minutes had passed since Elsie slipped away to sabotage the boiler. 20 minutes of suffocating quiet, broken only by the distant, muffled hum of the hotel above and the frantic hammering of her own heart against her ribs. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. A cold dread, sharper than the damp chill seeping through the stone walls, washed over Miss Marple. Elsie was resourceful, brave in her desperation. She wouldn't fail without reason. Had she been caught? Had Victor anticipated their move? Had Tommy already been moved? The possibilities spiraled, each more chilling than the last. She couldn't wait any longer. Every second wasted increased. Eyes darted around the cramped space behind the crates. Cleaning supplies, buckets, mops, harsh-smelling chemicals. Her gaze landed on a large, heavy-duty industrial floor polisher plugged into a nearby socket. An idea, desperate and reckless, sparked. Moving with a speed that belied her years, fueled by adrenaline and rage, Miss Marple grabbed the polisher. It was cumbersome, but she hefted it, aimed it not at the men, but at the stack of crates separating her from the laundry room. She jammed the power switch. The machine roared to life with a deafening, high-pitched whine, its heavy circular brush head spinning violently. She shoved it forward with all her might. The polisher crashed into the crates, splintering wood and sending bottles of bleach and ammonia tumbling to the stone floor with a spectacular, shattering crash. The acrid fumes of mixing chemicals instantly filled the air, burning the eyes and throat. The roar of the machine and the chaos of the falling crates created an heart of the operation. "Stand back," Miss Marple ordered, her mind racing. She remembered the journal. Deep cellar holds the key, but the sparrow's flight reveals the cage, and look to the water. She looked around desperately. Water, the cisterns were empty. But her eyes fell on the floor near the base of the largest cistern. A small iron grating, set into the stone floor, covered a narrow channel. It was clogged with slime and debris, but water, condensation, seepage, it was damp around it. She knelt, ignoring the cold damp seeping through her dress. She pulled out her magnifying glass. Etched faintly into the iron rim of the grating, almost invisible under the grime, was another tiny symbol, the same stylized sparrow in flight. "The sparrow's flight reveals the cage," she muttered. "The cage is this door. The sparrow." She traced the etching with a gloved finger. It wasn't just a picture. The wings were slightly asymmetrical. The angle of flight. East? She looked at the keypad. New. South? Or the key was south. She didn't have time to ponder. She punched the sequence into the keypad. 7, 3, 5, 9, S. A green light flashed. Access granted. With a soft hiss, the heavy gray door unlocked and swung inwards a few inches, revealing darkness beyond. "In! Now!" Miss Marple shoved Elsie and Tommy through the opening, then slipped through herself, pulling the door shut just as the wooden door to the laundry finally gave way with a splintering crash. Victor stood framed in the doorway, wiping dirty water from his eyes, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He saw the closing gray door and roared, charging forward. But Miss Marple hit the close button on the inside panel. The heavy door slammed shut, engaging with a solid final thud. A moment later, they heard the muffled thud of Victor's body slamming against the other side, followed by furious pounding and muffled curses. They were safe, for now. Miss Marple leaned against the cool metal door, breathing heavily. Her H. Explosive. Technical schematics, chemical formulas, and a list of targets. Primarily research facilities and government labs. The decryption device she'd hidden, it was the key to unlocking Chimera's secrets. This wasn't just about money or power. This was about stealing cutting-edge scientific research, potentially weapons-grade material. Lord Ashworth hadn't just been buying secrets. He was facilitating the theft of dangerous technology. Miss Marple, Elsie whispered, pointing towards a large safe built into the concrete wall behind the main desk. Look, the safe door was slightly ajar. Inside, Miss Marple could see stacks of cash, bundles of passports, including the forgeries she'd found in the hollow book, and several small, lead-lined containers. But what made her breath catch was a large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall above the safe. It displayed a live camera feed. It showed the riverfront. The North Quay. A sleek, black motorboat was idling near a deserted jetty. "Jane," Davy assured her, "stay hidden. We'll handle it." "One more thing, Inspector," Miss Marple added, her gaze fixed on the monitor showing the waiting figures on the quay. "The hotel's concierge, Mr. Humphreys, he's the local controller, and Victor is his chief enforcer. They're still in the hotel. They need to be contained." She hung up before Davy could ask more questions. She turned to Elsie, who was staring at her with a mixture of awe and terror. "Go, Elsie. Now, find the way out. Trust Davy." Elsie hugged Tommy fiercely, then looked at Miss Marple, tears welling again. "Be careful, Miss Marple, please." Miss Marple gave her a rare, genuine smile. "I always am, my dear. Now go." Elsie grabbed Tommy's hand and, after a hesitant look back, disappeared down a corridor Miss Marple hadn't noticed earlier, presumably leading to another exit. Alone in the communications center, surrounded by the damning evidence of Moriarty Holdings' vast criminal enterprise, Miss Marple felt a profound weariness settle over her, tempered by a cold, clear resolve. She had uncovered the truth behind Bertram's perfect facade. She had rescued Tommy. She had alerted the authorities. But the final act was yet to play out on the dark banks of the Thames. Nightingale and the Weasel were waiting, and Jane Marple, with nothing but her wits and the weight of the secrets she now held, was about to step out from behind closed doors and into the spotlight. The game was reaching its climax, and the stakes had never been higher. She looked at the monitor, at the two dark figures waiting on the quay, and knew that the peaceful haven Bertram's hotel pretended to be was irrevocably shattered. The truth was out, and it was time to face the consequences. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared to leave the hidden nerve center, ready to play her part in the final confrontation. The closed doors had been opened, and the darkness within was finally exposed to the light. Chapter 7. The clock strikes midnight. The communications center hummed with the quiet menace of a predator at rest. Banks of equipment pulsed with unseen data. The map of London bristled with pins marking illicit pathways, and the safe stood ajar like a mouth filled with secrets. Miss Marple stood alone in the heart of Moriarty Holdings' London operation, the weight of the decrypted files. Operation Nightingale, Project Chimera, Moriarty Holdings. A tangible pressure in her mind. Elsie and Tommy were hopefully speeding towards Scotland Yard and Chief Inspector Davies' protection. Nightingale and the Weasel waited expectantly on the North Quay, anticipating the decryption key and a hostage who was already gone. The net was tightening, but Miss Marple knew the most dangerous moments came when the trap was sprung. She needed to get to the quay, not to deliver the package, but to be there when Davy's men arrived, to ensure Nightingale and the Weasel didn't slip away in the chaos. It wasn't a chime. It was an alarm, a relentless, jarring hammer blow of sound, emanating simultaneously from the lobby grandfather clock and the east corridor bracket clock. It was the sound of a system in distress, a building screaming. Miss Marple didn't wait to see the effect. She moved quickly to the far side of the communications center, searching the concrete wall. According to the blueprint, the tunnel entrance should be behind a maintenance panel. She found it, a large square metal plate secured by heavy bolts. Using a sturdy wrench from a nearby toolkit, she began to turn them. The bolts were rusted, resistant. Each turn required immense effort, the sound of the wrench scraping against metal lost in the cacophony of the malfunctioning clocks above. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was maddening, incessant. It would draw attention like a beacon. Victor and Humphreys would think it was a real system failure, perhaps even an explosion. They'd rush to the lobby and east wing, away. Wristwatch, 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes to midnight. 5 minutes until Davy's men were due to arrive. 5 minutes until the trap was sprung. She needed to stay hidden, stay safe, and watch. Her part was almost done, but as she watched, a new figure emerged from the shadows near the approach road. Not Davy's men. This man was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a purposeful stride that Miss Marple recognized instantly, even in the dim light. Victor. He must have realized the clock chaos was a diversion and guessed where she might be heading. He'd come directly to the quay, bypassing the tunnel, likely using the hotel's own service entrance to the riverfront. He walked straight towards Nightingale and the Weasel on the jetty. Miss Marple was too far to hear the conversation, but she saw Nightingale's posture stiffen as Victor spoke urgently, gesturing back towards the hotel. The Weasel became even more agitated, wringing his hands. Victor pointed towards the water, then back towards the row. Made of dense, reflective plastic. It could catch light. She pulled it out. Using her flashlight, she angled the beam towards the road leading to the quay, the direction Davy's men should come from. She flicked the light on and off rapidly, 3 times, then aimed the reflective capsule directly at the road, catching the flashlight beam and bouncing a bright intermittent signal towards the approach. It was a primitive signal, but it was all she had. SOS, I'm here. Hurry. She repeated the signal twice more, her heart pounding with each flash. Victor was getting closer, only 20 yards away now. His pistol raised, sweeping the shadows. Nightingale stood her ground on the jetty, a deadly statue. The Weasel had the lines almost free, the boat's engine beginning to whine in protest. Suddenly, headlights sliced through the darkness from the approach road. Not the subtle approach of police, but the bright high beams of a vehicle moving fast. Victor and Nightingale both turned, momentarily. A pistol himself, aimed steadily at Victor. Scotland Yard, you're surrounded. Victor's shoulders slumped in defeat. He slowly raised his hands. Miss Marple lowered the pistol, her legs trembling with reaction. On the jetty, Nightingale, seeing Davy and the arrival of real police, realized the game was up. She threw down her weapon and stood up slowly, her hands raised, her face a mask of icy resignation. The MI5 agents, their apparent target escaped, began securing the area, their leader barking orders into a radio. Davy strode over to Miss Marple, his face etched with concern and profound respect. Jane, are you all right? Where's Elsie? And Tommy? Tommy is safe, Inspector, Miss Marple said, her voice weak but clear. Elsie took him towards the yard. She came back. She gestured towards the unconscious girl. She needs a doctor. Davy nodded to an officer, who immediately went to Elsie's side. Ambulance is on its way. And Tommy, I sent them with the evidence, Miss Marple said. leaning against the cold brick of the pumping station for support. "The files. They should be with your people by now." "They are," Davy confirmed. "And they're explosive. Project Chimera? It's worse than we feared. Biological agents, Jane. Stolen research. Nightingale was the broker. Lord Ashworth, the financier. Victor, the muscle. And Humphreys." Davy's expression hardened. "We got him too, trying to flush evidence down a hotel incinerator when we hit the communication center." Miss Marple looked towards the jetty, where Nightingale was being handcuffed by a stern-faced female police officer. The beautiful, deadly operative met Miss Marple's gaze across the distance. There was no fear in her eyes, only a chilling, professional acknowledgement. Then she looked away, her face impassive as she was led away. "The weasel escaped," Davy said grimly, following her gaze. "But we have the boat's registration. We'll find him. And the decryption key?" "Safe," Miss Marple said, a small, tired smile, touching her lips. "Hidden where only a sparrow would find it." She didn't elaborate on the deep cellar or the carved bird. Some secrets were best kept until the formal debriefing. Davy placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You did it, Jane. You uncovered it all. Bertram's Hotel, it's finished. The owners are already being contacted. The facade is shattered beyond repair." Miss Marple looked back at the dark, imposing bulk of the hotel looming over the river. The relentless clang, clang, clang of the malfunctioning clocks had finally ceased, replaced by the distant wail of approaching sirens. The perfect facade was indeed shattered, revealing the rot and corruption beneath. But in its place, perhaps, something true could be rebuilt. "The facade was never the point, Inspector," she said softly, watching the paramedics carefully lift Elsie onto a stretcher. "It was what it hid, and that," she nodded towards the captured Victor and the retreating form of Nightingale, "is no longer hidden. Justice will be done. That's what matters." Davy nodded. "Indeed. Now, let's get you out of this damp. You look like you could use a cup of tea. A proper one, not Bertram's." Miss Marple allowed him to guide her towards the waiting police car. As she walked away from the North Quay, away from the darkness and the violence, she felt the immense weight of the last few days begin to lift. Elsie would recover. Tommy was safe. Victor, Humphreys, Nightingale were in custody. The weasel would be found. Project Chimera was exposed. Moriarty Holdings' London hub was dismantled. Bertram's Hotel would never be the same. Its reputation for impeccable, timeless service was irrevocably tainted. But perhaps, in time, it could become something else. A place that remembered its past, acknowledged its secrets, and strove for a different kind of perfection. One built not on illusion, but on transparency and trust. As she settled into the back of the police car, the door closing with a solid, reassuring "T." "Justice will be done. That's what matters." Davy nodded. "Indeed. Now, let's get you out of this damp. You look like you could use a cup of tea. A proper one, not Bertram's." Miss Marple allowed him to guide her towards the waiting police car. As she walked away from the North Quay, away from the darkness and the violence, she felt the immense weight of the last few days begin to lift. Elsie would recover. Tommy was safe. Victor, Humphreys, Nightingale were in custody. The weasel would be found. Project Chimera was exposed. Moriarty Holdings' London hub was dismantled. Bertram's Hotel would never be the same. Its reputation for impeccable, timeless service was irrevocably tainted. But perhaps, in time, it could become something else. A place that remembered its past, acknowledged its secrets, and strove for a different kind of perfection. One built not on illusion, but on transparency and trust. As she settled into the back of the police car, the door closing with a solid, reassuring "T." Thud, Miss Marple reached into her knitting bag. Her fingers closed around the cool, smooth wood of her knitting needles. She pulled out the half-finished gray scarf. The stitches were even, the wool soft. A small, ordinary thing in the face of extraordinary darkness. She looked out the car window as they drove away from the quay, leaving the flashing lights and the shadow of Bertram's behind. The city lights blurred past. The hunt was over. The case was closed. The perfect facade had turned into a crime scene, and Jane Marple, with her wits, her courage, and her unwavering belief in the light of truth, had been the one to turn it. She picked up her knitting needles. The soft click-click as she picked up the stitches was the only sound in the quiet car. A small, comforting rhythm of normalcy restored. The clock had struck midnight, and justice, finally, had prevailed. Chapter 8. An Uninvited Guest. The sterile white walls of Scotland Yard's interview room seemed to absorb sound, leaving only the low hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock. Miss Marple sat perfectly still in a hard-backed chair, a cup of lukewarm tea cooling before her. Across the scarred metal table, Chief Inspector Davy leaned forward, his brow furrowed as he shuffled through a thick file labeled Operation Chimera, Bertram's Hotel. The air smelled of stale coffee and institutional disinfectant, a world away from beeswax and lilies of the valley. "So," Davy began, tapping a photograph of the communications center. "You're certain this was the primary hub? No secondary sites?" "Quite certain, Inspector," Miss Marple replied, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. The blueprint was comprehensive, and the sheer volume of traffic logs, financial records, and operational files found there. It was the London Nexus. Humphreys ran it with terrifying ease, but not for a lock, we understand. A key that requires a specific context to activate. She looked up at Davy. "Inspector, I need to see Bertram's hotel. Not the public areas, the private quarters, specifically Mr. Humphreys' rooms." Davy looked surprised. "Humphreys is in custody, Jane. His rooms were searched. Nothing." "Not searched by someone who understands the man," Miss Marple said firmly. "Humphreys was a creature of meticulous order. His rooms would reflect that. And the Queen of Hearts, it feels personal, symbolic. It might be linked to something in his private sanctuary." Davy hesitated only a moment. "All right, but you'll have an escort and a vest." Bertram's hotel was a scene of controlled chaos. The grand lobby, usually a haven of hushed tranquility, now bustled with forensic teams in white suits, uniformed officers directing staff for questioning, and journalists held at bay behind police barriers outside. The air still held a faint. Closely, it had a small, almost invisible keyhole on the side. "Sergeant, do you have a small key? A watchmaker's key, perhaps?" Miller checked his kit. "Nothing that small, ma'am, but—" He pulled out a multi-tool. "Maybe this." He unfolded a small, flat screwdriver. Miss Marple took it and carefully inserted it into the keyhole. It turned with a soft click. A tiny drawer slid open from the bottom of the clock. Inside, nestled on a bed faded velvet, was a single, perfect, dried white rose petal, and beneath it a small, folded piece of paper. Miss Marple unfolded the paper. It contained a single line of elegant script. "The Queen holds the key, but the heart must be true." She looked at the dried rose petal, then at the locket hidden in the book. Sentiment, symbols. "The Queen holds the key, the Queen of Hearts card, but the heart must be true." True love? True loyalty? The locket? She picked up the locket again. She pressed the clasp. It opened easily. But this time, she noticed something else. The edge of the locket, where the two halves met, was minutely thicker on one side. She ran her fingernail along the seam. There was a tiny indentation, a pressure point. She pressed it. With a faint snick, the back of the locket sprang open, revealing a second hidden compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a tiny silver key. It was ornate, old-fashioned, the head shaped like a small heart. The heart must be true, Miss Marple breathed. The key is the heart. She held it up, and the Queen holds the key. She looked at Sergeant Miller. The Queen of Hearts card, the chip, this key. They're part of a system, a failsafe perhaps, or a final message. Miller stared, bewildered. A message? To who? To whoever Humphreys trusted implicitly, Miss Marple said, or perhaps to whoever was meant to come after him, the true heart of the operation. She looked around the sterile room, then at the dried rose petal. Humphreys wasn't just a controller, he was a custodian. Of Bertram's secrets, of Moriarty's legacy. This, she gestured with a key, this is the key to the deepest secret, the one he protected even from his own operational center. But where does it fit? Miller asked, frustrated. We found no locks it matches. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. It wouldn't be in the hotel, too obvious, too vulnerable. It would be somewhere connected, somewhere only someone who understood Bertram's history would know. She thought of the journal, the deep cellar, the sparrow, looked to the water. But they'd been there. The river, the quay, no. Then it struck her. Not the water, the source of the hotel's perfection, its foundation, its name. Bertram's? Miller frowned. Bertram, Miss Marple repeated slowly. But the hotel was built by his family, before him. What was here before? Before the hotel. She recalled the blueprints, the age of the building, the land. It belonged to a larger estate, the Bertram estate, and the manor house. It was demolished, above all else. Not the decryption key, not the files. Something foundational. Something that could expose the entire network, globally. She looked at the news feed showing the chaos at Fort Halstead. The weasel's escape wasn't just luck. It was a distraction. While we hunted him, the guest acted. They tried to destroy evidence at Fort Halstead. They failed. They'll try again, or they'll go after the source. The source, Davy asked. Your Humphreys kept the key to the deepest secret, Miss Marple said. Not in his rooms, somewhere connected to Bertram's history. Somewhere old, somewhere that holds the heart of the original Bertram estate. She thought of the blueprints, the age of the foundations. The original manor house was demolished, but the cellars, the deep cellars beneath the west wing, they predate the hotel. They were part of the manor, and according to Elsie's mother, Mr. Bertram himself used a specific room there for private storage. She met Davy's eyes. The deep keyhole was unmistakable, a heart. Davy held his breath. Miller took the heart-shaped key from Miss Marple and inserted it. It turned smoothly. With a soft click, the tiny door swung open. Inside was not a compartment, but a narrow, vertical shaft. Dangling from a hook inside was a thick oilskin pouch tied with waxed cord. Miller carefully lifted it out. It was heavy. They carried it to the heavy oak table. Davy, using gloves, carefully untied the cord and unfolded the oilskin. Inside was not documents or a device, but a small, leather-bound book. It was identical to the journal Miss Marple had found, but older, the leather cracked and fragile. The title, embossed in faded gold leaf, read, The Bertram Legacy, Foundations and Duties. Davy opened it cautiously. The pages were filled with dense, elegant script dating back to the late 19th century. It detailed the construction of the hotel, the management philosophies, the family history. But towards the back, the tone changed. The entries became cryptic, referencing the great game, continental interests, and securing the future. There were lists of names, dates, and sums of money. And then, a final entry, dated 1914, signed simply MB. The world convulses. Old alliances fracture. New powers rise. Our work, begun in shadows, must endure. The hotel is our shield, our fortress. But the deepest roots must be protected. Should the shield fall, should the Bertram name be tarnished beyond redemption, the legacy must not perish. It is entrusted to the true heart. They alone hold the key to the continuation. Seek the source. The river remembers. The foundation endures. Below this entry was a small, hand-drawn map. It showed the Thames, the bend near the North Quay, and marked an X, not on the quay itself, but on the opposite bank, slightly upstream. Beside the X was a symbol, a stylized sparrow flying over a heart. The source, Miss Marple breathed. The river remembers. The foundation endures. It's not here. It's not in the hotel at all. It's buried. There. She pointed to the map. On the opposite bank, upstream from the quay, where the river bends. The original manor house stood on this bank. But the source, the foundation of the legacy, the true heart of Moriarty's power, it's hidden across the river. Davy stared at the map, his face grim. A burial site? A vault? Both, Miss Marple said. The final repository, the deepest secret. The names, the contacts, the proof that spans a century. The true heart, Humphrey's successor, the mole activated by the Queen of Hearts card. They know about this. They tried to destroy the evidence at Fort Halstead. They'll try to get to this vault next. To destroy it, or to claim it. Davy snapped the book shut. Miller, get coordinates from that map. I want a team at that location now. Discreet surveillance. And I want every resource we have, tracking that mole. The true heart. They're out. They're our uninvited guest, Jane, and they just became the most dangerous person in London. Miss Marple looked around the deep cellar, at the ancient brick, the hidden door, the heavy book in Davy's hands. The perfect facade of Bertram's hotel had concealed layers upon layers of deception, stretching back over a century. They had uncovered the hub, arrested the players, recovered the immediate threat, but the legacy, the true, enduring heart of Moriarty's conspiracy, remained hidden across the river, guarded by a silent, activated enemy. The uninvited guest was loose in the halls of power, and the final act of this deadly game was about to begin. The clock had struck midnight, but the shadows held deeper secrets still, and the hunt for the true heart had only just begun. Chapter 9. The Web Unravels. The Thames at dawn was a slate-gray expanse of shifting water, mirroring the bruised purple sky of impending daybreak. Mist clung to the surface like ghostly shrouds, twisting around the skeletal branches of riverside willows. On the north bank, the imposing facade of Bertram's hotel stood dark and silent, a wounded giant under police guard. Across the river, on the south bank slightly upstream, a different kind of silence hung heavy over the derelict chapel of St. Jude's. Its crumbling stone walls and broken stained glass windows spoke of centuries of neglect, a forgotten relic swallowed by London's relentless expansion. Beneath its moss-covered flagstones, according to the Bertram legacy map, lay the source, the final repository of Moriarty's secrets. Miss Marple stood hunched in the lee of a decaying boathouse 100 yards downstream, the cold damp seeping into her bones. Beside her, Chief Inspector Davy peered through high-powered binoculars. His brain mused. The legacy book spoke of foundations, duties, things built to last. Traps might not be technological, but mechanical. Victorian ingenuity. As Miller's team moved silently towards the chapel, a low, guttural voice crackled over Davy's radio. Movement. West side, 2 figures, approaching the main door, armed. Tension spiked. Davy grabbed his binoculars. I see them, hooded, moving fast, not our people. He keyed his radio. Team Alpha, intercept, non-lethal if possible. We need one alive. The tactical team melted from the shadows, converging on the 2 figures approaching the chapel's main entrance. The figures hesitated, then one raised a weapon. A sharp crack echoed, not a gunshot, but the sound of a taser. One figure jerked and collapsed. The other spun, firing wildly. Return fire. Rubber bullets struck him in the chest and shoulder. He went down hard. Secure them, Davy ordered. Get IDs, now. Officers swarmed the downed men. Within moments, Miller's voice came over the radio, breathless. Inspector, up here. The gargoyle. It's hollow. There's a mechanism. Looks like a winch system, ancient but functional. And there's a symbol carved into the stone beneath it, a heart with a keyhole. That's it, Davy exclaimed. Jane, you were right. Harding, get your techs up there. See if they can safely operate that winch. We need to know what it opens and where. While MI5 technicians scrambled up ropes towards the gargoyle. The two captured hooded figures were brought, struggling and cursing, to the boathouse. They were rough-looking, professional thugs, not the mole, but Muscle. Davy questioned them harshly, but they clammed up, offering only sullen defiance. Their IDs were fakes, but their gear was high-end mercenary issue. They're hired guns, Harding observed, watching the interrogation. Sent to secure the entrance or create a diversion, while the True Heart makes their move. They won't talk. Then we wait, Davy said grimly, for the winch, and for the True Heart to show themselves. Minutes stretched taut as bowstrings. The mist began to thin as the sun's first rays painted the horizon a delicate pink. Then Miller's voice, excited. We've got it! The winch activated. A section of the chapel floor, near the altar, has sunk down. Revealed a staircase, leading down. It's dark, but stable. Entry secured, Davy confirmed. Team Beta, with me. We're going in. Jane, Commander Harding, stay here. Coordinate. If the True Heart makes a move, we need to know. Miss Marple watched Davy and his team disappear into the chapel, then down the revealed staircase. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the earlier tension. She scanned the river, the opposite bank, the surrounding ruins. Where was the True Heart? How would they approach? They had resources, access, and insider knowledge. They wouldn't just walk in the front door. Commander Harding's radio crackled. Ma'am, anomaly detected. Secure internal comms channel being access. Priority override. Source. Source is within the Yard's mainframe. They're trying to lock down our comms, and they're accessing external surveillance feeds. They know we're here. Harding paled. They're not coming here. They're going after the evidence, the legacy book, the files from Bertram's. They're trying to erase the digital trail while we're distracted here. Miss Marple's blood ran cold. The Foundation endures, but only if the records survive. The True Heart isn't after the vault. They're after the proof we already have. They're destroying the web while we chase the spider. Can you stop them? Harding demanded into her radio. Working on it, ma'am, but they have high-level clearance. It's like fighting a ghost. Miss Marple's mind raced. The True Heart was inside the system. They needed to be flushed out. But how? She thought of the Queen of Hearts card. The microchip. It had been inert here, but activated there. What if? What if the activation wasn't just removal, but proximity? What if the card itself, when brought near its controller, could be used to identify them? Commander Harding, Miss Marple said urgently. The Queen of Hearts card. The microchip. Your text said it emitted a unique low-frequency signal when activated. Could that signal be used as a tracker? If we broadcast it, could it pinpoint the source? The True Heart. Harding stared at her, then grabbed her own radio. Tech support. This is Harding. I need you to isolate the unique signature from the Queen of Hearts microchip. Can you replicate it? Broadcast it as a low-power pulse. Can we use it to triangulate the source within the Yard? A tense pause. Ma'am, we can try. It'll take a few minutes to calibrate. We'll need to. Something unexpected, Davy's voice came back, strained. We're looking at a massive safe, Jane. Victorian combination lock. No visible keyhole. There's an inscription. The heart that is true unlocks the past. But only the worthy may endure the Foundation's test. What test? Thorne wouldn't know the test, Miss Marple reasoned. He's the inheritor, not the originator. He might have a key, a token, but not the knowledge. But the inscription, the heart that is true, the heart-shaped key. No, we have that. Unlocks the past. The safe contains the past. The worthy may endure the Foundation's test. The test isn't for Thorne. It's for the vault itself, a protection mechanism. If the wrong person tries to open it, it triggers a trap, Davy finished. But what kind? Collapsing vault? Poison gas? Something simpler, Miss Marple said, thinking of Victorian ingenuity. Something that preserves the secrets if the worthy heir doesn't come. Something cleansing. She recalled the dampness of the emotion. The web is unraveled. The legacy is secured. Thorne is in custody. The hired guns are singing. It's over. Miss Marple looked out at the river. The mist had burned away completely, revealing the sparkling expanse of the Thames flowing steadily towards the sea. The sun was fully up now, casting a warm, golden light over the derelict chapel and the captured criminals. The perfect facade of Bertram's hotel was gone, revealing the rot beneath. The intricate Zarpance-ho-Cortez, deadly web spun over a century by Moriarty's legacy, was finally, irrevocably, broken. It's over, Inspector, she agreed softly. The Foundation endured long enough, but the light has finally reached it. The truth is out. She picked up her knitting bag, pulling out the half-finished gray scarf. The soft wool felt warm in her hands. She picked up her needles. The quiet click-click as she resumed her stitches was the only sound in the sudden, profound peace of the riverside. The uninvited guest had been unmasked, the deepest secret laid bare, and the long, dark shadow cast by Bertram's hotel and its hidden masters had finally, mercifully, been lifted. The web was unraveled, and justice, at long last, had prevailed. Chapter 10. Restoring Order. The scent of beeswax and old paper had returned to the air of Bertram's hotel. But it was different now. No longer a mask for decay, it was the genuine aroma of restoration. 3 months after the dramatic unraveling of Moriarty's London hub, the grand lobby hummed with a new kind of energy. Not the tense silence of conspiracy, but the gentle bustle of craftsmen at work. Plasterers smoothed over cracks left by forensic searches. Artisans polished woodwork scarred by the struggle, and electricians replaced outdated wiring that had once powered a hidden communication center. The heavy crystal chandelier, clean to blinding brilliance, cast warm light on guests who now chatted openly, their faces relaxed, free from the unseen surveillance that had once permeated every corner. Miss Marple sat in her favorite armchair by the lounge window, the same spot where she had first observed the unsettling perfection that set her investigation in motion. Before her, on a small marble table, sat a delicate china cup of Darjeeling and a plate of freshly baked scones. The half-finished gray scarf lay in her lap, her needles clicking softly, rhythmically, a soothing counterpoint to the controlled activity around her. She watched a young couple admire the newly restored stained glass depiction of St. George and the Dragon. Above the main entrance, a piece that had been boarded up for decades, its vibrant colors now revealed. They looked happy, unburdened. The hotel was healing. Miss Marple? She looked up. Chief Inspector Davy stood before her, looking remarkably rested. The lines of stress etched around his eyes softened. He carried a slim, leather-bound portfolio under one arm. "Inspector," she greeted him warmly, setting down her knitting. "You look well. The yard treating you kindly after your recent exertions?" Davy smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression. A leave of absence was strongly suggested and enforced, though, he added, lowering his voice, conspiratorially. "I couldn't stay away entirely. Too many loose ends to tie up." And his gaze swept the revitalized lobby. "I wanted to see this, to see it working again, properly." He gestured towards the armchair opposite hers. "May I?" "Of course, Inspector. Please." She gestured to the tea service. "Scone?" Davy accepted, settling into the chair with a sigh of contentment that seemed to sink deep into the plush velvet. He took a bite of the scone, his eyes closing briefly in appreciation. Remarkable. Almost as good as the ones Mrs. Tibbs used to make in the canteen at the yard. God rest her soul. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of restoration a gentle backdrop. Miss Marple studied Davy. He carried the portfolio like it contained something precious, yet fragile. "The final reports?" she asked softly. Davy nodded, placing the portfolio carefully on the table between them. "The final reports and the legacy." He tapped the portfolio. "The Moriarty Manifesto, the Bertram Legacy Book, the decrypted files from Project Chimera, Thorne's full confession. It's all here. Or rather," he corrected himself, "the copies are here. The originals are in the deepest, most secure vaults the government possesses. Alongside the crown jewels, I shouldn't wonder." Miss Marple picked up her teacup, her gaze steady. "And the web? Is it truly unraveled?" "Every strand we could find," Davy confirmed, his expression turning serious. Thorne sang like a canary once the full weight of evidence was laid before him. He named names: buyers for Chimera, moles embedded in other European agencies, financiers, couriers. Interpol and our international partners have been busy. It's a global operation, Jane. Bigger, more entrenched than anyone dared imagine. But we've severed the London head, cut off the funding streams identified in the Bertram accounts. It's crippled, if not completely destroyed. It will take generations for something like that to rebuild, if it ever can. "And Sir Alistair Finch?" Miss Marple asked, the name still carrying a weight of sadness. "Found," Davy said quietly, "in a safe house in Belgium. Drugged, disoriented, but alive. He'd been interrogated by Nightingale's people after his abduction, but they hadn't broken him completely. He'd managed to hide the decryption device in the lining of his trunk before they took him. That's why they were so desperate to get it back. He's recovering now, under protection. His real name is Arthur Fleming. He was a deep-cover MI6 agent investigating Moriarty's resurgence. His disappearance triggered our initial interest, though we didn't know it at the time." Davy shook his head. "A brave man, nearly sacrificed everything." "And Lord Ashworth?" Miss Marple prompted, remembering the florid man poisoned over the sparrow-etched goblet. "Posthumously stripped of his titles and honors," Davy stated grimly. "His estates and assets seized under the Proceeds of Crime Act. His involvement in financing Chimera and facilitating the theft of bioagent research was irrefutable. The cyanide in the goblet, Victor's handiwork, on Humphrey's orders. Ashworth was becoming a liability. Too nervous, asking too many questions after Finch's disappearance. They silenced him permanently. Victor and Humphreys? Miss Marple asked, thinking of the brutal enforcer and the impeccably controlled concierge. "Victor will likely spend the rest of his life in Belmarsh," Davy replied. "Multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, murder. He's not talking, but the evidence is overwhelming. Humphreys. Interesting case. He's cooperating. Fully. Seems his devotion to maintaining the standard extended to preserving the true Bertram legacy as he saw it. He views himself as a custodian, not a criminal. He's provided invaluable details about the network structure, the dead drops, the codes. He's given us the entire operational manual for the London hub. In exchange, well, he won't see freedom, but he might see a less severe prison environment. And protection. He knows too much to be left vulnerable." "And Nightingale?" Miss Marple asked, remembering the beautiful, deadly operative on the North Quay. Davy's expression hardened. "Elusive. She vanished after the Quay incident. We've tracked her through half a dozen countries, but she's a ghost." Thorne confirmed she was Moriarty's top field operative, a freelancer of unparalleled skill. She's the one loose thread, the one spider that escaped the web. He sighed. But we're watching, always watching. She'll surface eventually. They always do. Miss Marple nodded slowly, absorbing the information. Justice, largely served. The immediate threat neutralized. The network crippled. But one shadow remained. And Elsie, and Tommy. A warm smile finally broke through Davy's serious demeanor. Thriving, absolutely thriving. Elsie has been offered a permanent position here once the renovations are complete. Not as a chambermaid, but as head of guest relations. She has an innate understanding of the hotel, its history, and what makes guests feel comfortable. And after what she endured, she deserves a position of respect and security. He chuckled. Apparently, she's already instituted a new training program for staff, emphasizing discretion with warmth. Sounds rather like the old Bertrams, but without the sinister undertones. And Tommy, Miss Marple pressed. In school, doing remarkably well considering. Elsie has legal guardianship now. They have a small flat nearby, provided by the Witness Protection Fund until things settle completely. He's a resilient boy, quiet but strong. He visits the hotel sometimes, sits in the lobby and does his homework. Seems to find the noise of the workmen comforting. Davy paused. They both asked me to pass on their deepest gratitude, Miss Marple. Tommy made you a drawing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Miss Marple unfolded it carefully. It was a child's drawing, done in bright crayons. It showed a tall building labeled Bertram's Hotel. Standing in front was a small figure with gray hair, glasses, and a distinctive cardigan, holding knitting needles. Beside her stood a taller figure, labeled Elsie, holding hands with a smaller figure, labeled Tommy. Above them all, a large, bright yellow sun shone. At the bottom, in careful, block letter, it said, "Thank you for saving us. From Tommy." Miss Marple traced the crude figures with a fingertip, a lump forming in her throat. She carefully refolded the drawing and placed it in her knitting bag, beside the half-finished scarf. "That," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "is the finest reward I could ever receive." Davy watched her, his expression one of profound respect. "You did more than save them, Jane. You saved the soul of this place. You exposed the rot so it could be cut out, allowing something healthy to grow back." He gestured around the lounge. "Look at it. It's Bertram's Hotel again. Not the facade, but the real thing. Or at least, the potential for it." As if on cue, a distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair and a kind, intelligent face approached their table. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored tweed suit and carried himself with an air of quiet authority. "Miss Marple? Chief Inspector Davy? I hope I'm not interrupting." Miss Marple's sign-in book for guests. The hollow book containing the forgeries was long gone, replaced by a genuine first edition of Trollope. Miss Marple ran her fingers over the smooth leather spine, remembering the tension of finding it, the danger it represented. Now, it was just a book in a library, where it belonged. She passed the linen cupboard on the first floor. The door was open. Inside, Elsie was supervising two new, young chambermaids, demonstrating the precise way to fold a sheet. Her bearing was confident, her voice clear and kind. She looked up and saw Miss Marple, her face breaking into a radiant smile. "Miss Marple, come in. Meet Lily and Rose. They're learning the Bertram's way." The girls curtsied shyly. Miss Marple smiled back. "The Bertram's way sounds much improved, Elsie." "It is," Elsie said firmly. "No more secrets. No more fear. Just doing a good job, making people comfortable." She lowered her voice slightly. "Tommy's coming by later to help me test the new tea service." Its windows glowing warmly. It was no longer a crime scene, no longer a fortress of secrets. It was simply a hotel again, a grand, old, slightly eccentric hotel, finding its way back to being a haven. The perfect facade had been shattered, revealing the darkness beneath, but in the clearing of that darkness, something true and good had been painstakingly rebuilt. Order had been restored, not by ignoring the past, but by confronting it, by holding the perpetrators accountable, and by choosing to build something better on the cleared ground. Miss Marple closed her eyes, listening to the deep, peaceful silence of the hotel. The hunt was over. The web was unraveled. The uninvited guest had been unmasked and removed. The foundation had endured, not as a monument to crime, but as a testament to resilience and the enduring power of truth. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, a quiet satisfaction in a job well done. In a small corner of the world made safer, in lives saved and redeemed. Outside, the city bustled on, unaware of the quiet battle that had been fought within these walls. Inside Bertram's hotel, restored to its rightful purpose, Miss Marple, the unassuming old lady with the sharp mind and the knitting needles, sat in her favorite chair. She had turned the perfect facade into a crime scene, and then, with courage, cunning, and an unwavering belief in justice, she had helped turn that crime scene back into a sanctuary. The clicking of her needles had ceased, replaced by the gentle, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the lobby, marking the steady, peaceful passage of time in a place where order, at long last, had been truly restored.